All right, we're starting to record now. Well, shall we officially start the meeting?
Yep.
All right then. Okay.
All in favour.
Please, yeah. All right. Please turn off your microphones if you're not speaking, so that you don't sort of come in and into this scene in the middle of somebody else talking, if you don't mind. So I'd just like to say welcome to everybody. Thanks very much for coming today. It's a special event. We're going to launch officially the Joseph Cardijn Digital Library, an online repository of all the writings. Well, when I say all, a small fraction of Cardijn's writings and speeches and documents related to his life. I'll talk a bit more about that a bit later. But before we even go any further, I did want to remember one thing before I introduce Monsignor Frank Marriott. One good friend of ours from Port Pirie, Father Chris Warnock, died overnight after a long struggle against Parkinson's disease. So I just thought it'd be good. I'm going to share a photo of him. I don't know how many of you might have known Chris, but he was a young worker, member of the YCW, as was his sister, Anne Jennings, and the younger brother, Matt. And Chris went off and joined the seminary in Adelaide and became a priest, but was struck down by Parkinson's at least 10, 15 years ago. And last night he went into eternal life.
What's the time?
Oh, I've got my son arriving. I'm recording. Yeah, so anyway, we just think of Chris today, and maybe throughout the meeting, everything that we do in terms of Cardijn, in the sense, is prolonging his own work and the work of so many people in the past who have contributed to the whole Cardijn movement. So without further ado, I'd now like to introduce you to Monsignor Frank Marriott, who many of you know, and no doubt better than me, or even for longer than me. I've known Frank since probably when I first joined the YCW back in the late 1970s, when he was still chaplain to the Young Christian Workers Movement in the Sandhurst Diocese. And he's maintained that lifetime commitment to the Cardijn message and to the Cardijn movements. Later, he became a chaplain and still is with the Teams of Our Lady, a movement started by a French priest who was also a former YCW chaplain, who I can't, well, maybe Frank can explain more the connection there. But in some sense, there's an inspiration from the Joseph movements in the Teams of Our Lady as a movement of the lay apostolate for married couples. So I don't want to go on for too long with the introduction. I'd just like to give Frank the opportunity today to share some of his experience on the YCW, on the importance of Cardijn's message today. And hopefully this little talk he's going to share with us today could also become a resource for the future. So without further ado, I'd just like to hand over to you, Frank. Don't forget to unmute. Don't forget to unmute. Unmute. Yep. There you go.
How's that? Well, thank you, Stefan, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining on this historic occasion. The first time round, my machines wouldn't work, we had to cancel. So the second time round, we're having another go, and one machine still. So obviously, I'm not a good technological character. Having said that, likewise, I'm not a trained theologian nor philosopher, but I thought I'd use the word, I'm a reformed diocesan priest. Reformed in the sense of reformed. And I say that very positively, because way back, the YCW used to have summer schools, and there was always a summer school for seminarians, and often there'd be 30 or 40 young men from all around Australia at Myawamba or Luana in Melbourne, thinking about the future and thinking about our role with young people, because in those days, as soon as you got appointed to a parish, your first thing you had to do was to start a youth movement. And I remember being told that with about 3 days in Cobram in 1963. That experience in the various camps we went to, but the working with the young people in those days did change me and change my outlook. And the reference Stefan gave to still interested, I'd probably use the word, I'm still vitally interested in the formation of the laity. And that's where I'll say a few words about that later. I'd like, Stefan, if it's okay by you as the interlocutor, that if people want to interrupt and ask a question, or if they want to put their thumbs down and tell me to keep quiet, you've had enough, please do so. It's a free night. And by way of just the broader introduction, I found the introduction to the book, if you can see that, when I read it again, very fascinating from my point of view, because the first paragraph says, Cardijn's writing this, that I've devoted the whole of my priestly life to the lay apostolate. But he had to wait until the eve of his 80th birthday to do some publishing. Well, I've gone a bit further than the 80th birthday, but I've been waiting for this event for years, of course. Secondly, in it, he noticed that the problem that this sets the young workers that's moving into the workforce has attracted me since my adolescence, and it certainly has attracted me. And I remember very vividly in Beechworth in the 1968, when I first went there, we had all these wonderful, beautiful young people who were leaving school year 10, 11 and 12. And within 6 months, they'd all got a job in those days at the mental asylum, as it was called even then. And within 6 months, they'd been, to a certain degree, destroyed. In those days, it was 12 hours on, 12 hours off, 2 days on, 2 days off. Often you got 3 days in a row. There was a heavy drinking problem, etc., in the town. And somehow or other, we were unable, despite a lot of things, we had a few groups, but that general sense of seeing good people leave school and not be equipped to handle what was going on in their work life. He's also got there, Cardijn, for the older I get, the more I'm convinced that the importance of the lay apostolate is a decisive factor in the future of the world and the salvation of humanity. I'd agree totally from that. And the other little one, and I can still remember hearing him say this, I think he visited Adelaide in 1958, I think it was. And we had a big collection of 5,000 young people from Adelaide turned up out of the seminary. And he used these words, each young worker, each working girl has a divine destiny and a divine mission, beginning not after death, but from today, in the conditions of everyday life. And then he ends up that page. It is part of the very essence of Christianity, the affirmation that there's something from birth and the belief, and that we are supposed to do something about it, applies to the whole conception of the Christian laity. My take on that is, and it's always impressed me from day one being those words of the Vatican Council and the document on the liturgy, full, active and conscious participation. And I've always applied that to the total life of the church, not just the liturgy. And I think that's what we're called to do. So having said all that, turn over the page and I'll start on what I'd prepared in another way. I'm grateful that we're able to do this tonight. I've read a fair bit of Cardijn. I wouldn't dare say I've read it all, and I understand some of the key comments, and I guess his inspiration has made a big difference in my life. There's been a lot of ticks of good things that we have done. I remember one of the great efforts of the Shepparton YCW when I was there. They had all these rallies for seat belts. Can anyone remember a time when there was no seat belts? And the youth of that place really turned the movement around. There was a policeman running a driving school and he got behind us. And if I dare have a little memory, the superintendent of police, Joe O'Sullivan, who was a great, good person. He went to school at Kilmore, therefore he had to be super good, of course. And he called us in one day. And so 3 or 4 of us, the young people, went in. Joe was sitting behind the big desk and he pointed to chairs just to sit down. And John Ransom just walked around the desk, put out his hand, said, I'm John Ransom. Who are you? And the whole meeting changed. Instead of being them and us, it became together we have a look at the whole question of road safety. So over the years, I've been through the mill with YCW, had all the local meetings, the national meetings. One of the first national meetings I went to was in Broken Hill, way back. Does anyone remember that? 1964, I think it was, 65. A whole team from Bendigo went up. I was also in Sydney in one of those very disturbing meetings we had in the early 70s when various, it was in the time of the Vietnam business and the YCW kids in Vietnam were being locked up because they were looking for justice in their community. I later went to Vietnam in 72 to meet some of those young people and decided that they were on the right side. And if you just look around the place, things really were very bad. And we weren't getting the real truth in Australia about what was going on. What did I do about it? Well, who knows? But I remember one day at a meeting, barged into a corner and someone was saying, we've got to do this, we've got to be. And I just said to them simply, violence begets violence. So you've got to find a peaceful way of bringing about change. Secondly, in one sense, I've been blessed on occasions with meeting the international movement. And that began in 1974, 75, when we took 30 young people from Bendigo and the diocese on a YCW trip to Malaysia. And it wasn't Malay, Singapore in those days. And we met YCW young people there. One of the chaplains in those days that I met was Joseph Ho, who got arrested by the local gendarmerie in those days and put into prison and disappeared eventually. In KL, there was a wonderful young woman called Irene Fernandez, with whom we communicated a lot, and she only died a couple of years ago and transformed life for many young people in those cities. But it was a great experience and broadened our understanding that YCW wasn't just sort of Bendigo or Shepparton, but it had similar young people doing similar things in different parts of our world. A few years later, I was privileged to do a youth, sorry? Yes? Okay. I was able to do a youth chaplain's course in the EAPI in Manila, and that became a bit of a battleground between those in schools and those in parishes. But again, I met an extraordinary group of priests, Mike Bransfield from Korea, John Trogget and Damien from Taiwan, Bill Tokus from Tanzania, other guys from Japan and various places. and we had our mentor was a guy, a Jesuit called Cardijn, and he was chaplain to Imelda Marcos. And there was a day in which an oblate priest from Sri Lanka produced the most moving, in those days, very advanced, those photographs and music and all that sort of, for about 40 minutes on the state of young people around Asia. And in many, many ways, that was a pivotal moment in my life and in the life of many there, because we'd been through this 40 minutes, and when the music stopped and the films came down, there was deathly silence in the lecture room. There's about 30 of us there. And Cardijn bounced in and said, "Today I want to talk about the sacraments." And I have to say that I stood up and said, "I don't know what you want to talk about, but you've just exposed us to all this stuff. That's what I want to talk about." Well, I got a big clap, and he told me later that he hated me more than he hated anyone else. He apologised before we left, but that sense of no good opening people to the experience of what's happening in the world without giving them a chance to reflect upon it. That experience stood me in great stead, because much later there was a big fight in my parish at Heathcote when the government wanted to dump all the liquid waste from the city in the forest. And we formed a action group there. I was made chairman of it, and we had the other ministers of religion in the town as the treasurer and secretary. And off we went, and we used the Cardijn method, and we won the day. I shouldn't say we won, but the interesting thing was within 2 years of that movement, all the liquid intractable stuff, 90% of it was been recycled. It's just that no one had made them do it. I'm not saying we made them, but everything. And we also had the Minister for Lands who offered the land living in Heathcote at the time. So that made life a bit interesting. And then one of the other little moments when I knew life was changing very much for myself and for young people was here in Bendigo in the late 80s. We had a meeting of young people, terrific. We were sat down a Sunday afternoon for about an hour and 3/4, 2 hours. They all got enthusiastic. And I said, "What about we get together again and talk about things?" And there was dead silence. I suggested perhaps we do it, next Tuesday, next Wednesday. And one guy said to me, quite innocently in a way, he said, "Look, it's 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. I don't know what I'm going to be doing at 7 o'clock tonight. How can I possibly commit myself to a meeting in 2 days' time?" And that, I didn't know what to say then, but what I knew was that I was a bit out of touch with what was happening, and kept trying in other ways to encourage people to do things. I was lucky to go to Bangkok for the meeting there on 2002, the 40th year of the document on the laity in the church. I wonder how many people have really read it. We had a good gathering in India 2016 and now tonight. So all that sort of stuff is part of my life journey, and I'd put a lot of that down to the formation I received in those youth camps and then later on through the national movements and all that. Now, somewhere in the middle of all this is somehow someone has got to speak about the masses, the workers. And it seems to me that just at the moment, we seem to have lost that ability in Australia. The social changes that are going on, the analysis, you might remember, and I'll bring this up again a little later, or maybe now, Cardijn's famous little thing about the steam engine, the invention of the steam engine, which created, in one sense, the modern working class, which then created the modern or the then workers' problems, and then created the workers' movement. And it struck me that the big social change that I'm seeing and trying to live with is the mobile phone. and it's created a different atmosphere. You go to a restaurant and everyone's looking at the phone. You try to cross the road, we're watching our phone. The information that is coming to us all through the phone is all filtered to a certain degree. And we've seen the results of that in Australia in the last few months, a couple of years, I suppose now. The addiction to the phone has created a new, in one sense, phone problem. How do we live with, and how do we use our phone in a proper and appropriate way? And who's teaching the young? Is it a subject at school that instead of just locking your phones away, is there a way in which somehow the young people have got to be encouraged to use their phone in a very positive way? One other little thing about the workers that struck me in recent times, I was up in Rochester a few weeks ago on supply and talking to the locals about, as I look around the place, and I know it well, fairly well, the land, there's just so much vacant land up there since the water thing happened. But one guy was telling me there's a fellow there's got 3,000 cows that he milks every day. And he has 17 workers. And it struck me, they are the new serfs in the Australian working environment. Once upon a time, there would have been 17 farmers looking after their own plot. Things have changed, except that. But is that the way to go? Is that the dignified way to go for the future? Cardijn, many years ago, I think we read it 70 years ago, October 51, wrote about the birth of big population, longevity of life. Well, for goodness sake, we celebrated a 94th birthday today of one of our priests, and he's one of 4 priests we have in our little diocese who are all over 90. When I was ordained, you were lucky to make 70. And that sense of those changes, do we really stop and analyse what society we're in at the moment? And this is the old YCW stuff, of course. Having a real good look at what's going on and making our decisions about things based upon that analysis. There are those who say, of course, that that was an old Marxist idea. But it's fascinating, isn't it, that the Latin American church adopted that sort of analysis to go forward, and it seems to have done it and turning things around slowly but surely, because they're looking at the reality of the life of the people in the light of the gospel and making the decisions that way. So I hope that'll happen a bit in our plenary council as well. The final thing there on those things is there are other technological things happening constantly now, and we don't get time to stop and think about them. What's happening on the farms, what's happening in, well, even, you know, the extraordinary production of these virus or the antidotes that we're getting out, the vaccines. You see the pictures of the machines that are producing and packaging and doing all that. It's extraordinary. It really is. It's very extraordinary. So are we different because of it? Do we look at things differently? As Cardijn said on one occasion, man does not live to work, man works to live. And one ponders those big changes in all our homes, and, you know, the fact that Sunday now is no different, except you've got to pay if you open your business, you're a shopkeeper and you want someone to wash the dishes, it's $46 an hour. And then we object to paying $6 for our coffee instead of $5. Maybe if we had a half a day off, it'd be a lot better, but I mean, I'm not going to be able to do that very easily nowadays. Trying to transform the working class, the younger people, and because there is still now, I made that observation about the farm workers, but the fast food industry and all that sort of stuff today, a lot of the kids are there. you ponder how they are being treated. It's very clear, Cardijn said on one occasion, that the transformation of the world as it is today, it's the job of all humanity. And we have to assume responsibility that we've never had in the past. So, and it was again, somewhere around there, he talked about that observation about the steam engine, how that had changed things, but we hadn't caught up with it. And I loved one of the other words I read and reminded me, he said, we could scourge ourselves till the end of the world and still the working class would be lost. And that's a sad statement, isn't it? After 2,000 years of pondering the gospel. And that brings back that reminder that when he got to see Pius the 11th, the Quadragesimo man, said that here's someone at last to speak about the workers, the young people. And he also said on another occasion that the greatest danger facing the church is not communism or socialism. It's the fact that the working class knows nothing about the church's teaching on the workers' mission. And I have a little thought on that, if I may. I've been very impressed. A number of people have read Laudate Si, the Pope's current encyclical. You know, for years and years, these documents had come out from Rome and they gathered dust on our desks. We rarely got together to really, they were good things, yeah, you plant the document and people will do something about it. But this time there seems to be a spirit about much. So maybe there's a good sign there that things are changing one way. But at the end of the day, it seems to me that the lesson I learned was if you're going to do things in your parish, you have to be prepared to give responsibility and live with it. You have to allow people, it's an awful word to use there, but if we're in a position of power, inverted commas, as parish priest, then we use our power to encourage others to do the things that God has asked them to do. And we must learn to live with those who are educated and whom we have educated, the thousands and millions of dollars we spend on the schools and elsewhere. And then when people get ideas in our parishes, we sometimes shut them down because, I can't cope. Now, to me, that's wrong. So after all these years, it's nearly time to stop talking about it, that I'm very happy, but I'm really a bit mad, really, to try and comment on all the things that Cardijn talked on, and again, but he did inspire me, and I'm hoping that this launch tonight will give other people the opportunity to find out what he was saying, because so much of it still resonates in today's world, which again brings me, how did we lose the vision? How did we lose the enthusiasm when we had thousands upon thousands of young people in Australia meeting one night a week, thinking about their lives, meditating upon it, well, they would never have used that word, and doing little answers. And I remember on one occasion after many months here in Bendigo, one of our young people who was a bit shy and he had a few difficulties, and you might all remember that, and it sounds awful in today's world, that we used to try and encourage people at one stage to help the little old lady, now I'm a little old man, across the road. Well, one night at the meeting, and remember in the old Cardijn house here in Bendigo, this young fellow came bounding in and he was as happy as a lark, and he said, I did it. And he changed, his life changed. He'd actually helped, stopped on the edge of the road, saw this lass trying to get across, took her across the road, and then it all made sense to him. Do, reflect, and do again. So I'm very happy to, in one sense, to be part of the launch of this battleship tonight. We don't have any champagne, Stefan, to break over our screens or to drink, but all those documents that are available, and I can't list them all because you've added more since we started out on this place. But there was one other little quote, and you all would remember this, that Cardijn and the chaplains of my time were, the young worker faces life. Remind them, each worker has a vocation. Talk to them about what makes a leader. And a leader ultimately understands that he or she has a vocation, and he or she brings those strengths from that reflection upon not just the gospel, but reflecting on the life that they have in the light of the gospel. And he's written a lot about that. Some of you would remember better than me the three truths: the truth of faith, the truth of experience, and the truth of pastoral practice. I think that might be just about enough from me. So if I may, in this sense, say, let's launch the e-library of the works of Cardijn. We thank those who've worked so hard to put them on there. Let's commit ourselves to try and allow others, and many others, to know that they're there, and to rejoice that we've been part of that movement, and see if we can give encouragement to those still trying to bring that sense of seeing what's going on, judging in the light of the scriptures, and then doing something about it. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Frank. Much appreciated for that. Yes, I can see hands clapping on the screens there. Yeah, well, that's fantastic. All your experience of the YCW and how to put that into practice in parishes and all sorts of ways. Yeah, look, I don't know. Would anybody like to kind of give some feedback, some comments, and then a bit later, we'll just explain a bit practically about how the library works. So I don't know if anybody would like to ask a question or make any comments. I think there's a lot of challenges in what Frank said, especially in the light of the plenary, bringing the worker issue into the plenary, the whole question of formation, the lay apostolate, a lot of issues really, actually. Yeah, so, and I suppose the library offers us the resources to dip into and make our contribution. Anybody like to jump in? Heather. Yep, don't forget, yeah, you're unmuted.
Yes,
yep.
Unmuted, thanks. Thanks very much, Frank. That was very, very fascinating. One thing for today, I just noted down while Frank was speaking, was the living wage. Remember, we used to always at our meetings talk about what is a living wage and how important that is. Not just a minimum wage or $40 a day or whatever, but actually a living wage where you have the dignity of the person is respected.
Yeah. It's a big debate today, isn't it now? And, getting away from wasn't it the harvester judgment that we're all brought up on? A man, a wife, and 3 kids, I think. How much does it cost for them to live? And then, of course, the actuarial people or the bean counters get stuck into it. And yeah, a big question.
I was just going to say, Brian, you want to... Oh, okay, Wayne. Yep, go on. Yep.
Yeah, just on the matter of wages, in the last few days, they've discovered some of the farm workers throughout Victoria have been working for $2 and $3 an hour when the going rate's $15 an hour. And then recently, a leading Liberal backbencher he thought $10 an hour was sufficient, but an 18-year-old was saying, well, the legal wage is $15 an hour because that's around about the basic wage. And you see Joe Biden in the United States, 50 million Americans work below the poverty line, and he's tried to introduce a social wage of a minimum of $15 an hour. And all people have done who are sitting on incomes of 300, 400,000 are saying, oh no, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. And this is the issue we're up against. But I was at a meeting today with Gordon Priest from the Anglican Network and Lindsay McMillan from the ITIM Network, and it was really interesting. And what they spoke about what Frank said about the dignity worker over and over again. Gordon's actually written a book on the vocation of work through his work, and then ITIM is now looking to sponsor movements within the Catholic and the Protestant denominations that will actually really get work back as the dignity of work back as the centre issue, and to re-expose workers to be, as Frank said, we don't live to work, we work to live. To really bring back that whole sense of apostleship that we grew up with in the 60s and 70s, that it's the way that we give our gifts back to ourselves, but also to each other and to the whole community. So it's interesting that those Cardijn ideas from over 100 years ago are still alive and well.
Sorry, Brian, do you want to come in there about on the just wage issue?
Yes, it's I've been involved with minimum wage cases in the Fair Work Commission for a number of years, up until last year. I'm no longer involved, but a lot of work has been done by the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, or an agency of the Australian Catholic Bishops' Conference, and so there's plenty of material around. I think it's unfortunate that we've lost concern about the living wage and what's happened to the level of support that that workers get through the arbitrated wage system. Unfortunately, the national minimum wage is not a living wage. It's a long way short of it. And if you have a look at the decisions of the Fair Work Commission over the last few years, you'll see that they're driven by economic considerations and not, in part, social considerations. And one of the requirements that's on them in the legislation is that they have to look at economic and social factors. And we now know, there's no doubt about this, that many working families are living in poverty. Many children in working families are living in poverty because the wages are too low. Yet, again, if you have a look at the decisions of the Fair Work Commission over the last 10 years, you won't see any concern about the fact that there's poverty in working families. Frank Brennan gave a very good paper in the Rerum Novarum oration a few years ago, where he identified the problem. And the problem is this, that the Fair Work Commission is prepared to put up with poverty in working families because it takes the view that it's the government's role to provide funds through family benefits and so on to keep working families out of poverty, or the children in working families out of poverty. The government says no, and there's a standoff. And as Frank said, it's a standoff between the two of them that's doing no good, and kids are living in poverty because of it.
Yeah. Anybody else? I know I must admit, now that my daughter has finished high school and she's gone out and got a job in a restaurant, and she actually wants to go to and do a TAFE kind of course instead of go to university. But really, it's kind of literally shocked me to see the struggle she's had in her restaurant. It's just terrible, really, and it makes me very conscious of the lack of the YCW where I live, 50 kilometres south of Perth. She has got in contact with the new part-time full-timer for the YCW here, but he's a part-timer and Perth is 50 kilometres away. Somehow, how do we get back to what Frank mentioned before about creating something that can reach out to all those people leaving school? It just amazes me, and it's my personal comment. It shocks me as well, since I paid $4,000 a year for her to go to a Catholic high school. And then she learns nothing about the workplace or the working life, and then suddenly it's literally what Cardijn said 100 years ago. We abandon young people as soon as they enter the workforce. And I must say, I feel that viscerally right now, you know. But anyway, whatever. This is all the reasons why we need to, I think, move back and rediscover Cardijn and make him known to a new generation. Anybody else like to make any comments?
Stephen, Laurie O'Farrell from Bendigo.
Hi, Laurie.
Wife Kathleen here. I was a Bendigo, getting off slightly different item for the moment. I was in YC Bendigo for 57 to 62, and my wife was about the same. But if I can just talk and thank Frank for that talk, and some of you will know, or should know, that Frank, going back to the late 50s, 60s, is involved in the YCW, and the lady has never ceased, stopped, slowed down. He retired a few years ago. I think he's doing more now than he ever did, even though he used to do a huge amount. But Frank has been a legend in many ways, as you all know. And I can see Wayne clapping there, and he obviously knows the great work that Frank has done. If I go a little bit back to when I was in it, and similar thing now, as you all know, we all had the see, judge and act principle, and how wonderful that was, still is. We can still apply it to our daily lives, and how great it would be if we could spread the same message a bit more, so that people can, one, make sure that there's always two sides to the story, slow down, contemplate, and see, judge and act before something is done. And it's a great principle. Certainly Cardijn was a wonderful guy, and I was fortunate in 1958 to be in Melbourne and see Cardinal Cardijn out here. Enormous crowd, which from memory we were at the Olympic pool site, I think, where that took place. But now we have great memories, as well, Kath and I were both in the YCW, and as Monsignor Brian Long, and many of you will know Brian. He was sort of there before Frank as our chaplain, and he always, for many years later, said how wonderful and so many wonderful marriages turned out from those YCW weekly meetings that Frank spoke about. So they were great days. As Frank talks about the lay apostolate, the plenary council, we only hope that the various submissions that have been put forward to certainly encourage the lay apostolate to be so much more involved as they will need to be, and just to hope that those decision makers in the plenary council will encourage that and adopt that. But just to briefly make that sort of comment, and we are forever grateful to men like Frank Marriott, Mother Lombard, you'll recall, Leo Lacey and Bendigo, Mons Long, and many of you will have your own chaplains over all those years. But our contact with the YCW goes back a long way. It was tremendous and so important to us in our young days, and hopefully the young people of today will get back to those similar principles. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Laurie. Very inspiring. Yeah. Anybody else like to share their experience or comments? Janet, is it? Yep.
I'll make a comment here. I was in the YCW in Wangaratta at the same time as the previous speaker, and I was in for 8 years, and Father Peter Quinn was our chaplain, and he was absolutely wonderful. We had lots of leaders at the time, and it was a very successful group, and it gave me a great spiritual life and also good social life. And I'm very grateful for that. And I joined the Josephites in 1964, and I suppose it was the principles of Cardijn that attracted me to Mary MacKillop's mob of see, judge and act, because really that's what she did in her life. So I'm grateful for my YCW experiences.
Thanks very much, Janet. Any other
Just
comments?
like to say,
Yep,
just
go on.
the comments so far of past tense, but also it's current tense, because the Cardijn Community of Australia, which was formed 12 years ago now, formally, was a group of mostly ex-YCS, YCW people who were tired of belonging to groups that did a lot of thinking and contemplating, but no action. So after a conference at Cardijn College, we decided that we'd had enough of that. So it was reformed and just gone from strength to strength there, covering several dioceses with a number of people doing various things in various places around Australia. So it's not something we grew up with in the past, but it's something that's alive and well if you're over 30, because our membership starts at 30 and finishes when you're about 121. So you've got lots of time, because we're in this age now where our children are so busily engaged in having 2 and 3 jobs to keep a roof over their head and pay their children's costs. It's really up to the 55 pluses to pick up that momentum and really keep the issues going. You don't have to go into meetings anymore. A lot of people can operate from behind a keyboard or a telephone line, and really that's something that's around for us to do. And with the plenary having lots of wonderful ideals, we're going to need some sort of praxis to actually put that into action. Well, the easiest thing to teach people is to see, to judge in terms of what the gospel is calling us to do, and then to do something about it. And that principle is alive and well in so many movements, especially ours. So it's still very current.
Thanks a lot, Wayne. Yep. I see Fred Sims arrived. How you going, Fred? Good to see you there.
Hi, Stefan. I'm good, thanks. And yourself?
Yeah, all right, we're going well. All right, this is Fred, a mentor to the current YCW. I think, are you still got that title, have you, Fred?
Still there
Right.
in Perth. I just like to pick up on what Wayne said, and I think that's where the gap is really, like, when one was reflecting on his own children and the lack of time. I think that's just kind of a little bit of the reality that, not only people from his children's generation, but like my generation and the current YCW's generation are really faced with. We've got so many competing kind of priorities with work, social life, family, and other commitments. It really, and you've got so many different organizations and things out there as well. It becomes a bit of a challenge to I guess, as Laurie was mentioning before as well, slow down and reflect and think. And unless you've already got that base of understanding the review and the method and the value, and you actually value that, it's hard to get people to do that. I think with this current kind of group of young people, and it kind of does change almost every other time, because young people move interstate for work and have many other things happening, but we're trying to, I guess, instill some of that in them, so that whatever bit they can get from it, they will use that, hopefully, in wherever they're at, and take it with them. And who knows, someday they might come back, some might retain more of it than others, and if we can inspire even a handful of young leaders to do these sort of things, it's worth it, I think. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Fred. Yeah, good to hear about the challenges and what the present YCW is doing. So we're at now 4:53. I think maybe, unless anybody got any other comments I'd like to add, I'd just like to share a bit about how the actual library works, since that's what Frank has launched today. So I'm going to turn on the share screen on my computer, and you should be able to see the actual library, which of course you'll be able to on your own computers later if you haven't already had a chance to do so. It's pretty easy to find the Joseph Cardijn Digital Library. Just type in his name.com, josephcardijn.com, and obviously you'll come to the front page there, and you see across the top there the various headings under which we've organised the different items. Here on the front page, you see, actually, we've produced our first ebook. Frank mentioned before those famous speeches of Cardijn, the young worker faces life, the 3 truths. They're all contained in that book. So actually, you can download that, and it's a ready-made resource for anybody that really wants to get the essentials of the YCW and of the lay apostolate. And really, I think it's an important thing in the light of the plenary council coming up. Gives people access to exactly what Cardijn said. The second one down there, you see on the right, Cardijn to Vatican II is a blog that I started recently. which is going to follow Cardijn's work at the Second Vatican Council, almost well, it's not quite day by day because he didn't actually do things every day, but already I've been chronicling what he did in the preparatory commission. Cardijn always emphasised preparation. So in a sense, the most important work he did for Vatican II was in the 2 years before it actually opened in October 1962. And you'll see I'm progressively loading them up there, all the different documents that he wrote to influence and the battles he had, because many people just didn't want to listen to the ideas that he was proposing. But the outcome by 1965 is what we see in the Vatican II documents today. But here I'll just come back to the different headings I've got at the top of the thing. You see we've got the writings there. They're organised again into different headings, chronological. You can read what Cardijn wrote when he was a young guy. And what I call the golden age is when the YCW spread throughout the world from 1925 until by the time World War II broke out, 1939, the YCW was in 50 countries. And there was no internet, there was nothing today. And I believe the reason and the way it got around the world was because they had just incredible resources. The manual of the YCW, the monthly leaders bulletins, which were picked up in so many countries and modified and adapted to local realities, as for example, here in Australia. And then we see after the war, it really became a world movement. I don't know if any of you were in Rome in 1957, when they had that famous pilgrimage with 32,000 young people there, which I personally believe, I can't prove it, but I actually believe that was at least one of the inspirations for what later became World Youth Day. And then finally, the Vatican II era, where really, it was really kind of providential, you could say. The whole generation of priests that not only joined the YCW, but have been members of that founding generation from 1925 to 1944. Many of them were bishops, and there they were in Vatican II. Nearly 10% of the bishops of Vatican II had a background with the YCW or the YCS. So you can read all the different writings of Cardijn in those different eras. I just sort of click on it there and you can see one by one and, go through it and find different things. He wrote many different magazines and they're all organised as well and under different headings. Obviously, there's overlap. Sometimes you can find one article in more than one place because we're trying to sort of make it more available. But you'll also see there's many gaps there as well. For example, on the YCW manual, we've only got one section of it up so far because actually very little of it was ever translated into English. So there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of Cardijn documents that are only a very small proportion of them have ever been translated to English. Even so, we've still got somewhere nearly 200 documents in English there. Prefaces. He wrote prefaces to many different books. Well, only one of them is available in English. Letters. Oh, there's literally thousands of letters that Cardijn wrote to people around the world. It'll be an actual project in itself, which I'd love to sort of get going one day, to get people to contribute, to put back into the archives and make them available, the letters that he wrote. And of course, Vatican II, this is his key documents that he wrote for the council. Here, one of the Canadian bishops of the council talking about the Sea Judge Act, Pierre Hauptmann. Everybody's forgotten about this guy, even in France. He was French, although he's got a German name. He's the actual author, the final author of Gaudium and Spes. Who knows that? It's something, and it's the 50th anniversary of his death this year, actually, because he sadly died in a bushwalking accident. Jimmy Gleeson, one of our famous bishops from Adelaide, Rosemary Goldie, Australian as well, the first woman to work at a high level of the Vatican in the 60s. There's many, many things there. Of course, you can say no young workers that have joined the YCW at the age of 16 or 18, they aren't going to be interested in that. They're interested in meeting the other young workers and doing some practical action, things like that. But this library is a resource for people that really can be the mentors and the chaplains and the key leaders of the movement. It's resources for them to know all the things that Frank spoke about earlier. So again, you've got another heading here, the classics. It's kind of a shortcut. If you don't want to go step by step through all of Cardijn's writings, you can find here there's about a dozen of the key things. If you read those books or articles, you've got the key writings that Cardijn gave. Another section there on his life, biographical works. There's a range of them really, shorter biographies and longer biographies. And this is an area where we've still got a lot of work to do, photos that we can add. There actually is literally thousands of photos of every era of his life, which slowly over time we'll be able to post up there. And this is also quite interesting. We only found this last year. Cardijn speaking at Ballarat. And when we discovered that it was online, well, actually it wasn't online, but a record of it was put there by John Maloney from Ballarat. He deposited all these works, and we requested to the National Library to put it online, which they did. So there you can hear Cardijn speaking live in Ballarat in 1966. And there's things like that. And over time, we'll add to the documents. Now, here's another interesting thing, which I'll just finish with this. There's an incredible range of people. Just go through the A to Z here of all the different chaplains and leaders. There's only a small selection of them here, but for example, here there's Jose Arizmendi Arrieta, the founder of the Mondragon Worker Cooperatives in Spain. There's Alfred Ansell, a key bishop at Vatican II. Mike Bransfield, yeah, you mentioned Frank. You mentioned Mike Bransfield. Frank, there he is. He's gone into eternal life there, but I've got a bit of his life background there, and there's many other YCW background. John Curnow from New Zealand, a very famous YCW chaplain, and slowly I'm adding biographies for all sorts of people from the beginnings of the movement, people who worked with Cardijn, right up to the present. Len Faulkner got a page there, our Bishop Len. And many of you would have known him. And I managed to get record a few videos of his experience. So there you go. You can all sorts of things there as well. Saints as well. This is a Chilean saint, Saint Albert Hurtado, a Jesuit who was one of the founders of the Catholic Action movements. I don't know if you could call him the direct founder of the YCW in Chile, but he certainly set the tone for in which the YCW was founded. Ted Long there, you got more. Frank Lombard, you can just go through them. And Pepe Palacio, a martyr. One of our martyrs from 1975. He was killed by the military, and he founded the YCW in Brazil with Enrique Angelelli. Yeah, Enrique Angelelli, here he is there. It's 60 years this month since Enrique Angelelli became a bishop. I actually believe he was already a chaplain in Argentina. Angelelli was one of the inspirations for Pope Francis. And I actually think that Cardijn might have had his eye on Angelelli to become a national or international chaplain of the movement. But Rome got him first and made him a bishop. And he also was killed by the military in 1976. So these are our martyrs, martyrs of the Cardijn movements, the Joseph tradition. So, I've got some of this stuff up there. There's so much more to add over time, but I just think, well, this is what the Cardijn Library makes available for people. And hopefully, together we can make it more available, let people know that are actually in teaching roles in the seminaries. This is what Cardijn used to do, promote Cardijn, promote the YCW in the seminaries. Hopefully in the Catholic universities, we can let people know that these resources are available. And it's add to it in the future. I just want to mention here, thanks to Heather. Yep, we've got Heather has been one of our volunteers for proofreading. We actually need more. So if you've got time or anything, we scan the documents, but they never come out perfectly. So we have to correct them. Sometimes we can even improve the language, which has got a bit outdated. So we need to develop a team of people to add to the library for the future. So that's what I wanted to share to you, let you know about it. And hopefully we can all share that together as we go on. So I don't know if anybody would like to ask any questions about that or make any comments.
Excuse me, Stefan.
Yep.
I need to leave the meeting at this stage.
Sure. Yep, no worries.
Congratulations on what you're doing.
All right, no worries. Great to have you here, Janet.
Yeah, thank you very much. See if I can go out.
Yes,
Bye.
good night.
Good night.
Stefan,
Yeah.
just a little comment on the list of people. It's worth remembering that Caffarel, who began teams with these group of people, and Cardijn, they were called I think, ultimately by Helder Camara to be at the Second Vatican Council on behalf of the lay people. There was, when they were debating the role of the laity, there was no one there who knew much of, had hands-on action. So the YCW, the two chaplains, they were called in, and Camara eventually, I think, reminded the Pope that if anyone was going to really listen about this work for the laity, if you like, or with the laity, he had to do something. So he made Cardijn a cardinal, and then they had to listen to him. But nowadays, at least we've got, I think, the recent appointment of the French laity last to the Synod of Bishops. So something has happened in 60 years. Takes time.
Yep. Yeah, well, that's a good point about Camara. It's true. He was the one that proposed first to Pope John that Cardijn become a cardinal, but he was already, literally almost on his deathbed at that stage. And actually, I don't know if I've already posted it up, but Camara wrote to Paul VI within a month of him being elected as Pope, and said to him, "You've got to make Cardijn a cardinal." And he, in fact, did in his first consistory, yes, and that was the end of early 1965. So he was ready for the fourth and final session as a cardinal. That's right. Yeah. I know, it's just fantastic. It's unbelievable, like the things that have come out of the Joseph's movement. And we've just got to make it known again to future generations. Yeah. So there you go. Oh, there's Heather, like to comment. Yep.
Yes, Stefan. Look, just to thank you very, very much for an extraordinary endeavour you've done, and it's a tremendous resource for not only for all of us, but for the whole world, really. Thank you very much for all your work there.
All right. Yeah. Well, I must say I enjoy it, but I have to admit it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work and a lot more to be done. So we really need to build up a team. So thank you for joining the team, because it's going to last beyond my lifetime, for sure. And I didn't point out that the French site, but there's a French site as well, which is actually, it's already got more than 500 of Cardijn's articles. And I know there are many, many more, so over time, we've got to build up a French team as well. And people have already asked me, what about a Spanish site? Yeah, sure, I'd love to do it, but we've got to build up the team and the resources to do it. Yeah.
Well, I have the Spanish, but not French.
You got Spanish? Oh, well,
Yes.
There you go. That's a discovery. Thank you. Okay, well, you've dobbed yourself in there.
I lived in Colombia for 5 years.
Oh, wow. Well, there you go. You shouldn't have told me that. Yeah. Okay, I'll be in contact with you, Heather. Yeah, thanks.
I just want to thank, this has been a great learning experience for me. I have never had much to do with the YCW, but we're looking at reactivating, reanimating our parish, and this has given me a whole lot of ideas, plenty to reflect upon and share with people. So thank you very much for making it available.
Thank you, Cornelia. Yeah.
Cornelia, one of the things we can offer you is we have an inquiry called My Community, which you can adapt to any parish, which will help them if you get a group of people just to look at the basic building blocks in your parish. And really, we've worked with a few parishes with this, and that we've adapted it, and they've really started to identify things that are right in front of their nose. But it wasn't until they started to look at the questions they could see what needed to be done, and was really successful in building up a parish from being a pew attending parish to a living church. So if I get your details, I can send that inquiry to you.
Have you got an email, Wayne?
Yes, I have.
Would you just...
my email is Wayne, W-A-Y-N-E, McGough, M-C-G-O-U-G-H, at 48@gmail.com.
At 40 or 48 at?
It's Wayne McGough 48@gmail.com. The
Gmail.
W,
I can-
the M and the G are uppercase letters.
Yep.
Anyway, we can share all that a bit later if you like. Anybody like to?
Okay, happy to do that.
We'll make a
Stefan.
contact list for everybody so that it's sort of, be no mistakes also. Yeah. All right. Well, look, it's 10 past whatever time zone we're in, 10 past 5 here, 10 past 8 and you're over east there. Anybody else like to make any final sort of questions, suggestions? Otherwise, I'll hand over to Brian, who's going to say a few closing words. Okay, we've had a good session, I think.
And
Would you
that
like to?
looks like
Yeah.
me. On behalf of the Australian Cardine Institute and the participants in tonight's webinar, I'd like to thank Monsignor Frank Marriott for his very thoughtful presentation and his launch of the Joseph Cardine Digital Library. I just want to pick out one line that he used in his presentation, which is, I think, very important. He referred to, quote, meeting one night per week, end quote. Now, for all of us who have been in the YCW, active in the YCW, we know exactly what he meant. And for me, it was that one night of the week, Tuesday night, 7:30 in the presbytery with the curate, and the leaders group would meet. And that's where the formation came. That was the way the YCW worked. It was formed in, I think, primarily presbyteries, but other places as well. And it brought to mind that reality brought to mind Cardine's saying that in the YCW, the priest is everything and nothing. Sadly, we're in a position now that we haven't got the priests who have got the time or perhaps the training, because that was something that was touched on by Frank in the presentation. They haven't got the impetus to do what was done in days gone by. So it's a shortage of numbers and I think a loss of orientation. And the big challenge, I think, for us, and hopefully tonight might prompt a bit of a response to the challenge, is how do we create the same outcomes in a very different environment? Because as we all know, the old parish-based YCW model has gone. It can be re-established in some respects, but we need to be looking at a wide range of other things in order to maintain and grow the movements, I should say, plural, in the future. So the presentation tonight, I really think brought home to all of us that we miss priests like Frank Marriott, who can work with us day in and day out in parishes. So thanks very much, Frank, for the presentation. And I'm sure all of us have similar thoughts to those that I've just expressed. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Thanks to everybody for coming. And what I'll do is just in closing, I don't know if we're going to get it edited down, but if you don't mind, I will share with you the raw video so you can share it with people that might have missed out tonight. And if we have somebody to actually edit it into a more professional thing, we'll do that too. Okay. Thanks very much to all. Keep chatting if you want.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, go on, Brian. Yeah.
Sorry, Stefan. You should be formally congratulated on all of the work. You've already been acknowledged in some of the contributions, but it's really important that we acknowledge the work that you've done in putting that library together, not just in recent days and weeks, but over a fair part of your life. And you're a real champion of the Cardine cause. And I'm sure when you meet up with Cardine, he won't get a word in. You'll have so many questions to ask him.
Yeah.
Where's that missing letter?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Brian. All right.
Righto.
Thanks to everyone. See you all later.
Thank you, Stefan.
Well done.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.